So I am Jillian Weinberger. I work for Vox.com and for Vox Media. And last summer, I went from WNYC, which employs hundreds of audio journalists, to Vox.com, which employed 2. So this has been a journey, and I'm going to talk to you about that today. And I'm going to talk about it through one show in particular, but before I get there, I wanted to talk about the conversations that I have at Vox that I didn't have at WNYC and vice versa. So at WNYC and at public radio stations generally, the medium is taken for granted in a lot of ways. It's audio. We all know it's audio. You know, they do great work in video and in social, but we're there to make audio stories. At Vox, the medium serves the story. So the first thing we think about is the story, which is exciting as a journalist. That's what we all care about. And we think about, okay, does this work best on the web? Does it work best in video? Does it work best on social? If it works best in audio, is it a podcast? Is it an episode of something that already exists? Do we have to make a whole new show? And within that show, is it an interview show? Is it a roundtable discussion? Is it a highly produced narrative? Is it some combination of all of those things? But we're starting with the story itself. So the show I'm going to talk about all of this through is called The Impact. It's hosted by the fabulous Sarah Cliff. And we launched last October. It's a highly reported narrative show. So when I arrived at Vox last July, the team that was already there had this very, very important thing in place already. Like, I cannot stress to you how important this is. And I've worked on teams that didn't have it, and it was not so good. They already had a thesis statement or a frame for the show. So this one reporter I used to work with at WNYC named Amanda Aronchik, she's fantastic. She would always talk about thesis statements through thinking about 2 different shows at WNYC, which was Radiolab and Freakonomics. When Radiolab started, they covered science. But science wasn't their frame or their thesis statement. Their frame was curiosity. So they covered science through curiosity. Freakonomics covers economics, but that's not the tagline of the show. It's the hidden side of everything, right? So they cover economics through that frame. And at The Impact, our first season focused on healthcare, but that wasn't our frame. Our frame was how policy affects real lives. So I'm going to play now, this is Sarah Cliff in our first episode. I have to go over here to do that. Okay, great.
Welcome to The Impact, a new show on the Vox Media Podcast Network about how policy affects real lives. I am your host, Sarah Cliff, and I have been dying to make this series because I think too often policies are treated as these kind of theoretical white paper ideas. But they're not. They have actual impacts and shape the real world that we all live in. This season, we are focusing on my favorite type of policy, healthcare, on the federal, local, even hospital level. And we're going to look at what health policy means for real people across the United States.
Little theme song there, too. Okay, so why is frame so important? It's important for you, and it's important for your audience. So for you, I promise if you invest in a frame at the beginning when you're making a show from the very beginning, it will be so much easier for you to go through pitches as they start to come in and to think about how you want to present the show as it goes forward. Because if you have a frame, it's really easy for you to say, is this an impact story or is it not an impact story? You will be able to tell really quickly, I promise. And then it's also really important for your audience. So there are now like a zillion podcasts, right? Your audience wants to know what they're getting when they hit download on your show. So for your audience, it's really important for them to understand what makes this distinctive, what differentiates it. It also will allow you to go into many different topic areas. So our first season focused on healthcare. Our second season, which we're making right now, focuses on, it's going to be about policy experiments all across the United States in different states and localities. But it also looks at how policy affects real lives, right? Both healthcare stories and those kinds of stories fit in that frame. And it helps if you start with your host's expertise when you're starting a show. So Sarah is very well known as a healthcare reporter. She has a million story ideas about how to report on healthcare. So we started with healthcare. We built an audience. We built a relationship with that audience, trust with that audience, and we can now go off in a million different directions. Again, if you look at other shows, you can see them doing the same kinds of things. So Radiolab, they started with science. They started with, Robert Krulwich was a well-known science reporter. Now they built this audience. They built this trust with their audience. They're doing a million different topics now. The same is true with a show like Startup, that great show from Gimlet. They started with how they built the company. And now that they have an audience that trusts them and loves them, they're looking at a million other companies. So it's a great way to kind of build an audience.
Welcome to...
Not what I meant to do. Okay. So I wanted to end on this. This is really, really, really important when you're working with a team that has a wide variety of expertise. It's respect begets excellence. So mutual respect goes a long way. And I first realized this when I was working out of Reveal at the Center for Investigative Reporting. I walked in there and I was just in awe of all these investigative reporters, some of whom had broken huge stories. I had no experience in investigative reporting. I was there as an audio producer. But I luckily got paired with a really fantastic reporter. Her name's Catherine Miskowski. And we kind of built this symbiotic relationship where I trusted her on all the investigative pieces. She trusted me on all the audio pieces. And we came together to do the storytelling. And it was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot from her. And the same is true with Sarah Cliff at the show. So she knows a ton about policy. She's been reporting in DC for a long time. I'm new to DC. So going with her to interview a congressman last year was a very instructive experience for me. And I'd never done that before, but she has never really done very much in audio before. So we come together to make these great stories, and we really respect what the other can do. I will say you won't always be paired with Sarah's and with Catherine's. There may be people who don't understand the medium, who you need to be forceful with to explain what makes a good print story, a good web story, a good video story might not work in audio. You might have to be loud and impassioned about what you do to make the best story that you can make. But I have found that if you treat your colleagues and their expertise with respect, they'll respect you in turn. And that makes for a great team. And a great team makes for the best stories. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.